Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast, your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It's a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realms of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey towards healing and self-discovery. Here, I'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and I'll engage in sacred conversation intended to stir your soul and lead you back into your power. I'm all about demystifying woo and witchcraft. So, whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, I'm so delighted you've decided to join me on this journey. Let's make magic. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Woo Curious podcast. I am your host, Eileen, and this is going to be a solo episode for you. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to drop into today and speak to you about today, I really just kept coming back to some of the themes that came up during the free week that I hosted between March 25th and March 29th. That event was called Bloom, and it was really designed to help the participants begin to reconnect with their bodies and find the base of their power, the root of their power. And that's where the title of today's episode comes from, is this question of where does your power come from? Because there are so many things that we misconstrue as being our power. I was writing today about how independence and like hyper independence can feel like power, right? It can feel like you are being powerful and strong by doing it all yourself, by not needing to ask for help, by never relying on other people. And this is actually not a power move, as I wrote in the post. It's actually a form of trauma response. It is a way to feel or to help ourselves feel safe. Often it is a way to help ourselves feel worthy. And a lot of the things that we do or the behaviors that we have that sometimes can feel like really positive attributes, like this really go get 'em attitude, this can do attitude, always there to help other people. There's a lot of really good traits that allow us to succeed in the world, but that if they are done out of a feeling of necessity or compulsion or desire to feel safe or appear strong, really leave us out of our power. And this is a big topic. I feel like we could go off in many different directions here, but what I really want to focus on today is how to tune into like the building blocks, the most basic aspect of your power. And that space, the foundation of your power, really comes from being able to tap into and access and trust an embodied yes and an embodied no. This comes back to intuition, right? And I know that intuition is a topic that so many people are interested in and want to go deeper with. Intuition episodes of this podcast are consistently the most listened to. And so it is a topic that we will be coming back to again and again. And it was where we went in Bloom. And though Bloom is not available to watch the replay anymore for this year, it'll probably come back next year. I did want to offer those of you listening here who weren't able to attend that or didn't know what was happening this time around, to start to tap into your intuition and start to find your power now instead of waiting until next year comes around and bloom happens again. What was really interesting during this week, the very first day, I dropped everybody into a guided visualization to tap into how yes and no feels in the body. And what came up for 90%, all but one of the women who were there live with me and who shared with me also if they'd seen the replay, was that yes felt pretty easy to tap into. And it was like this big, expansive, bubbly, excited, the butterflies and the tummy kind of sensation often. It was a high vibe, if you will, response in the body, emotional response to the word yes. But what happened to so many people, almost everybody, when I prompted them to tap into what no felt like was quite the opposite. It was this collapse response or tension between the shoulder blades, fear from some of them, this real clenching, difficulty breathing, shrinking feeling. And this really gave me a big piece of insight into why it is so difficult for so many women to access and act upon their power. Because while no has a different energy than yes, a sacred no, it's not contracted, it's not small, it's not shrinking, it's not suffocating. A sacred no feels big and rooted. It feels powerful. It feels fierce and ferocious. It feels expansive, but in a very different way than yes. Yes tends to feel quite light and buoyantly expansive, whereas no feels like a solid and grounding kind of expansion. And it got me to thinking, why was this the response? And my own too. When I think about how it feels to say no to somebody, my body also does a lot of that contraction stuff. It used to only respond that way. And I've really, over the years of walking down this path with wild medicine and witchcraft, I'm really starting to claim and own my no and be able to stand in my sacred no, but I'm not there by any means. I am on the path, a few steps ahead, perhaps, from some of you. But part of the reason that this no is so difficult is because women are discouraged from a very young age, from the time we're little girls. We're discouraged from saying no. We're told that our no is not as important as the no of others, perhaps. We are pushed into situations we're uncomfortable with and told we must be there. The classic example, I feel like I'm a bit of a broken record, but the classic example of the mom saying, go give your Uncle Bob a kiss. And you feel really uncomfortable about doing that, but you're being told that what your body is telling you isn't as important as what the adults in the room want. So it starts really little. But then even as we get older, right, the good woman is self-sacrificing and puts everybody's needs ahead of her own. And so even if her body is saying no in a situation, the people around her are saying, whether explicitly or subconsciously by their actions or the mood of the room or small facial and physical gestures, that she should be saying yes. And we really learn to override this no in our bodies for a long, long time until we lose our connection to the sacred no. And then we get this no that is fearful, because if we say no, we might make somebody else feel bad. And that's definitely not something good girls do, right? We don't make other people feel bad. And if we say no, we might be being selfish. And that's not something that good girls are. We are not selfish. If we say no, there might be repercussions. There might be quite real repercussions. There could be pushback, there could be anger, there could be disappointment and hurt. And because so many of us have grown up feeling as though managing everybody else's feelings around us is our responsibility, hurt and disappointment and anger and pushback all feel really bad to our nervous systems. They feel really bad to us. It's like, oh no, I did something wrong. It's difficult, even if we know cerebrally that other people's emotions and responses are not ours to manage, it's really difficult to get our bodies on board with that when we've spent a lifetime reinforcing that belief and that behavior. I want to just make a note here that if saying no in some situation in your life would put you in physical harm or physical danger, then please don't think that I'm preaching that you must start claiming it and owning it. Please reach out to somebody and seek some support to get yourself into a safe space. So a lot of the work that we did in Bloom last week that I do with my one-on-one clients is this continual, like, gentle returning to the knowledge that we are allowed to say no and to take up space and to have our boundaries and to ask for needs met, all these things that you hear me say on this podcast. And having somebody to hold and guide you in that space to remind you of that, because we're going to forget as we walk this path, as we try to reclaim the power that is our divine birthright. We are going to stray. We are going to stumble. We're going to fall back into old habits, those shrinking no's. So on day 2, I dropped everybody into a visualization of a big, powerful, Kali centered no, which felt really great. It also reminded me that, this no, this powerful, expansive, sacred no, it's really tied to our sacred rage. And Ellie and I had a whole podcast episode on sacred rage. So if you're curious to hear more about that right now, you could always go back and listen to that one after this wraps up. But again, rage, and no is the voice for rage often. It is the trigger, the warning. It's there to protect us from situations that are unsafe. When you smack your shin on a coffee table and you have this flood of anger and you want to pummel the coffee table, or even your kid nails you in the chin with their head and you feel this heat of rage wash over you, even though you know it was a mistake and you're not actually want to hurt your child, but there is this physiologic reaction because our bodies, they're designed to keep us safe. And rage is a response to something that could be harmful. And often when we feel that response, an appropriate way to respond in our societal world, our culture, we can't just go around hitting things that made us mad, or at least please don't. But, an appropriate response to that triggering feeling of rage is often saying no. And because I really am hopeful that this podcast is a space for you to be able to explore some of these thoughts and feelings and your woo curiosity and how does woo tie into power and all of this, I really want to make sure that I'm weaving in some story. And so I'd love to tell the story, and I think I've mentioned it here before briefly, but I haven't told it really deeply. But the story of when my body started telling me no, saying no really, really loudly in my marriage, and I ignored it for a long time. And I know women who ignore their bodies and all the signs for much longer than I did. And so this is just to say that my own no has been really hard to find. It's been hard to reclaim. It's been hard to trust. And it's still sometimes hard to act on. I just want to acknowledge that this is a path, it's a practice, but reconnecting to my body and then to the land and the earth and remembering that my body is of the earth has been a really powerful tool for me in reconnecting to my no, my divine, my sacred no. So the story is that of heartburn. And in my marriage, my past marriage, I remember sitting on the couch one night after dinner. And I had this like pain in my chest and I didn't know what it was, but my husband knew. He was like, it sounds like heartburn. Let me get you some Gaviscon. Like, okay. I had the Gaviscon, it went away. I assumed that the heartburn was there because I just had a big meal and I was slouching on the couch. When I did some reading, that made sense. And a few months later, it happened again. And then it was kind of like, oh, yeah, it could happen occasionally after a meal if I slouched on the couch. This all sounds like just a very physiologic situation of heartburn. Perhaps it's just getting older. And then the heartburn started showing up in the middle of the night. It would usually wake me up around 2 or 3 in the morning, and it would last. It would get me out of bed. It began to be more and more painful. It would last longer and longer. And the Gaviscon, the Tums, that all the other things that I had to try to manage it stopped working. One by one, all of these different drugs, these remedies, weren't able to control this heartburn, which at this point was happening several times a week. And I remember talking to my mother about this going on, and she said to me, well, I only get heartburn when I'm stressed. And I didn't think I was stressed. I mean, I was a full-time midwife, so I was definitely busy. And I knew by this time, I knew that I was really unhappy in my marriage. I knew I wanted out, but I felt like I couldn't for multiple reasons. I felt like I couldn't let him down like that. I felt like he was a good man. He cooked for me all the time. He took good care of me. All he wanted was to build a family. How could I do that to him? How selfish was I being that I might want to leave? I was too old to leave. I'd sunk too many years into this relationship. If I ever wanted to have children, I had to stay. Maybe this was as good as it ever would get. Like, who was I to think that anything could be better? There were so many of those stories going on, not to mention this like really old story I'd told myself about the worthiness or the goodness of people who had a divorce. And now this wasn't a conscious new story in my head because I'm sure at this point I had friends who'd had divorces, and I didn't think less of anybody who chose to get a divorce. But I do remember writing like a childhood bucket list thing of all the things I would never do, which is a really interesting peek into my childhood, actually. And, one of them was drink coffee in the morning or rely on coffee in the morning to wake up. Well, that one was off the list because I drink coffee every day. I started to do so sometime during my first degree in university. And one of the things on that list was I will never get a divorce. And I think I really, really held on to this story. It was rooted deep. I didn't want to disappoint my friends or my family or myself or him. And all of these pieces combined to me being absolutely unwilling and unable, really, to hear my body saying no. It said it quietly at first, and I ignored it. It got louder, and I ignored it. It got to the point where I was on a daily prescription medication to manage this heartburn. My heart was literally on fire in my chest because I was in a relationship that wasn't good for me. I mean, how perfect a metaphor is that? And I couldn't hear it for the longest time. And when I was finally able to make the move, take the step, and leave that relationship, my heartburn disappeared. I ran out of my pills a few days after I left, and I have had heartburn 3 times since then, for which Gaviscon gets rid of it real quick. And it's always been during the day. And it always now is this beautiful reminder to check in with my stress level, with my heart, with everything going on around me. So the wisdom is in your body. And the beliefs of society, of your parents and teachers, of your ancestors that have been passed down through your genes, the beauty of epigenetics, these have masked that beautiful, pure wisdom that lives in your body. So, where does your power come from? I really believe it comes from your body and reclaiming your sacred no. I'm going to wrap up here. I never know how long I've been talking. So funny when I do these podcasts with a guest or back when I did them with Ellie, I was always really conscious of how long we'd been on. I'm always conscious with a guest as well to be mindful of their time. But when I get on my rants on my own, it's like I'm in a whole another vortex. So all that to say, thank you for being here. Thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for listening. I would absolutely love to know what you thought of this episode. If things are bubbling up for you, if you feel like you have a good connection to your sacred no, or if perhaps no feels a little bit more like that kind of collapsing, scary, gross feeling that comes up for so many people when they start to try to find their sacred no. And I really hope that you will tune in next week for my discussion with Carissa Brockman. We had a beautiful chat about, parts work, meeting parts of self, that piece that I've been speaking to quite a bit lately. And she does a lot of work in that area too. So I'm really excited about the next 2 weeks of interviews, actually are delightful. I think they're all going to be delightful, but those are the two I've edited. Anyways, Carissa is next week. And I really hope you'll join me for that. As always, if you liked this episode, please rate it, leave a review. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, you kind of got to scroll to the bottom of all the podcast episodes in order to leave a review. They really don't make it easy on us. And it really helps. And I'd love to read those aloud on the podcast again if you feel called to share. And as always, come on over to Instagram. Find me at the.woocurious.podcast or at myluminous_life_ for the time being. I'm running both those Instagram pages as separate entities, even though I'm one person. I don't know. It just all feels a bit up in the air at the moment, but I am responding to both. And I always love to hear what you think of the episode. And of course, if you enjoy this, please share with your friends. It helps so, so much. I am so grateful for you all. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll be dropping into your ears next week.